Hi, and welcome to Living History. My name is Marianne Tashko, and it's my pleasure to be interviewing some of the more prominent citizens of our Conejo Valley. And it's my pleasure today to introduce to you Mr. Marvin Sosna, who is the founding editor of the Thousand Oaks News Chronicle. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Nice having you. Founding editor.
Well, yes, there was no News Chronicle. There was a Conejo News. I didn't found that. But the Conejo News and the then Conejo Chronicle merged, and the News Chronicle, that happened under my tenure. That was in 1964, and I became the founding editor of the News Chronicle, which no longer exists, of course. That, I think, went into limbo sometime in 1992 or 3 or 4. I left town in 91, and I came back, and it really doesn't look that different. Thousand Oaks now looks something like a tree that has kind of just grown more trunk. It's just more of it. But what was then in place is still in place.
Well, you and Thousand Oaks go back a while, though.
1953 is the first time I saw this place.
And what brought you here?
I had a job in Ventura. I had a job interview in Ventura. I'd come to California from New Jersey because I wanted to marry a lady who lived in Los Angeles. She wouldn't live in New Jersey, who would? And so I came to California to get a job, and I sent letters to newspapers, and because I was then a journalist. And a newspaper in Ventura said they could interview me, so I drove up what was then Highway 101, which was just a 2-lane road that goes past Timber School and that kind of thing, and to Ventura. That's the first time I saw what was then Thousand Oaks, which was not anything, literally nothing. The post office was in Newbury Park, and that was a much bigger community than Thousand Oaks. Thousand Oaks had something called Jockey Mead's Meadowbrook Plunge, which was a swimming pool. The public could get in for a fee. It was where the Bank of America building, well, I guess it's not the Bank of America building anymore. It's where the building that was the Bank of America building on Thousand Oaks Boulevard is. That was then the Meadowbrook Plunge. And the Redwood Lodge, Eddie Cover's Redwood Lodge, was the restaurant, and that was it. Literally, that was it. The road wasn't dirt, but it might have been. There was just nothing here at all. In 1958, there was still not much here, but by that time the boom had hit. And a fellow named Harris Goldberg was building a lot of houses down here. I was at that time a reporter at the Ventura Star Free Press, now the Ventura County Star. And I got wind of what was going on down here, and of course you have to understand at that time, it was such a separation. Ventura was the place in the county. It was the county seat. Oxnard was the county factory. It had the agricultural processing plants. And Thousand Oaks was nothing. The Conejo Valley was literally nothing. Kind of a spillover from the San Fernando Valley at best. And the County Board of Supervisors was totally disinterested in the area. They'd just as soon annex it and Simi Valley to LA if they could. LA wouldn't have it either. They couldn't serve it. So it was kind of a limbo land. I heard about this guy, Harris Goldberg, who was building a lot of houses down here. At that time, Time magazine had a Mr. Boom cover, Mr. Boom of the 50s. I forget who it was. But I came down here to interview Harris Goldberg, Mr. Boom of Ventura County. He built the meadows, the old meadows, Conejo Oaks, Tara, all these tracts. Everything, just about everything, east of Moore Park Road was Harris Goldberg's. And he built faster than he could build well. But at the time I interviewed him, I thought, gee, this town's really going to go places. Things are happening down here. But that was all that was happening. Jantz had not built anything. Jantz was a land subdivider. They were selling land. So it was a kind of, and it was so ditzy because they had no water. They had no sewer system. You don't build houses like that. You can't build houses that don't have toilets. I mean, things got to go.
Did all the houses have cesspools?
They had one septic tank for a group of houses.
Oh,
they would just all flow into one. They had a private water company that had terrible water. I mean, the water literally rusted the faucets off the wall after a year. It was that bad. It was corrosive. And people were buying these houses and not realizing that, at that time, both the state and the county laws were a lot more flexible and less enforced, frankly. The upshot of it was that by 1960, a lot of those houses started falling apart. They had cracked slabs. They were built on expansive soil that when it was wet grew up like a sponge, and when it was dry, contracted. Well, walls don't move. Walls come apart. Cabinets were coming off the walls. People's houses were literally falling apart. And the county said, hey, we don't know nothing about that. That's no problem. As a reporter, I got into that pretty heavily, and there was no way to move. I mean, you couldn't hold the builder responsible. The county was shrugging it off. There was at that time a small weekly down here, the Conejo News. Guy Runyon had started that newspaper. And Jantz was starting to develop the Conejo area a little bit. They were the two brothers were kind of interested in it. They started getting more interested in making money. They had this 10,000-acre ranch, which they had inherited from their father, which was kind of a playground. They didn't really plan on using it, just kind of a place to bring the kids on a weekend. It was just dry ranch land. There was nothing. It was not the kind of land that you would want to conserve. There wasn't a tree on it. It was just barren.
No oaks?
No oaks. No oaks. The name Thousand Oaks was coined before they ever got into the business by a man who was developing the area back in the 30s or 40s. He got a hold of some land up here, and he had a contest to name the area. It was then Newbury Park. I mean, Newbury Park was an established community. They had that stagecoach in, which no stagecoach ever stopped at, but it was a place. Thousand Oaks was not. It was nothing. It was not a thing. And he got this land, and the story goes he ran a contest to name the area. And there were some oak trees down around Erbs Road, but nothing out in the Jantz area at all. And so he ran this contest, and by a strange coincidence, his daughter won the prize. She named it Thousand Oaks. And that's how Thousand Oaks was named, literally.
I did not know that.
At one point, Jantz wanted to change the name from Thousand Oaks to Conejo because their tract was named Jantz/Conejo. That was what, and nobody could pronounce Conejo, like Ojai, who knows how to pronounce that. But they wanted to change the name of the area. There was an election held, and of course the Conejo News came out against that change, and it was defeated at the polls. Otherwise, it would have been called Conejo. It was a different time then. The area was kind of freebooting. It was almost like the Wild West. There was no law and order. There was no controlling factor. Everybody was out to just do it. Whatever you wanted to do, build a house, cut down a tree, slice down a hill. There was no control. Now, I came here in 1964 as the editor of the Conejo News. By that time, it had become a daily, and the Chronicle had become a daily as well. There were about 20,000 people living here at that time. That was an enormous growth, considering in 1960, I think the census would probably show they had less than 6,000. So in 4 years, they just flooded in here. They came in to buy the cheap houses. $15,000 would buy you a house and some land, enough land to have a leach line for your septic tank. And houses in the San Fernando Valley were selling for twice that. So they came out here to buy a house and get the air and live the good life. In 1958, however, the Jantz brothers had gone before the County Board of Supervisors and had established a master plan for the area. It was really revolutionary at the time because there were no master plan communities. They hired Victor Gruen, who was a Beverly Hills land architect, not a building architect. And he designed Conejo Village, all of it. The whole 10,000 acres.
And what's Conejo Village?
Well, Conejo Village included everything all the way out beyond Cal Lutheran and all the way out beyond the industrial park, Rancho Conejo. That whole thing was theirs, 10,000 acres. And he did this land plan that had a center here and a college there. It was going to be an institute of technology, a factory area. It was going to be a self-contained community. Not gated, but self-contained. It had everything anybody would want. Schools were located, really a macro and micro plan. And the County Board of Supervisors at that time were a bunch of ranchers, and they said, hey, fine, go ahead. We don't know what all those fancy colors are, but go ahead and do it. I know, because I covered that meeting. And that was the plan that really became the first plan for anything in this area. when Jantz started developing their properties, that was the plan that they adopted. And believe it or not, it worked. It really worked. Where what is the Jantz Marketplace now was then Caneo Village Shopping Center. That's where he had it planned. They had a golf course across the street, which was then an airport. They had a private airport that Jantz's used to fly in and out of. And that became the golf course. The schools, the college was located where it was going to be. All the industrial park was located where it was going to be. They literally made it happen. But they couldn't close the freeway. And the people who moved in didn't want to stay here. They wanted to live here, but they wanted to work at their old job. And that just blew the whole plan apart. It fragmented the idea that they had of this kind of new age town where people would be able to walk to work. But they lived with that. They took that disappointment. In 1964, when I came, the city had been incorporated less than 3 months. It incorporated in, I think, September 64, and I came here the day after Election Day, November 64. At that time, there was only one city in the county that went for Barry Goldwater, who was the Republican candidate against Lyndon Johnson, Thousand Oaks. There were signs on people's front lawns for Goldwater.
Why was that? Why do you think this area attracted the Republicans?
I'll tell you why. There was also on the ballot a measure called Proposition 14. Proposition 14 was going to overturn an act that the legislature had passed, the Rumford Fair Housing Act, which banned racial discrimination in the sale or rental of housing. And the sign said, Goldwater, yes on 14.
Oh.
My wife and I drove through Thousand Oaks before we decided to come. When the editor told me about the chance to come here, I wasn't going to wait. I said, you get a chance to be the editor of a daily newspaper once, let's do it. Well, he said, take a ride through. Because everywhere else in the county was kind of civilized. Well, anyway, we drove through it and saw all these signs on people's front lawns. And they didn't have any political signs on front lawns in Ventura. They didn't do that kind of stuff. And I looked at Ethel, and she looked at me, and I said, what do you think? And she said, well, I think they need us here. I swear, that's what she said.
What are the demographics now? Do you know, as far as
here?
Democrats and Republicans?
80% Republican, I think. Always has been. Sure, Tom McClintock was a local product.
Mm-hmm.
And look what he was. Ed Davis was a local product, all these guys. But I was not a Republican, and I still am not. And I'm a progressive, and I decided that maybe she was right. Maybe they need us here. And
so
that's
you
how
were the
it started.
subversive editor, founding editor
Yeah.
of the News Chronicle.
And I survived.
Yes.
You can survive.
Yes. So did you write your editorials? I mean, what were your editorials like? Were they sizzling or?
They were direct. They were what I wrote them as if I were writing a letter to somebody, to one person. I used to have a theory that there's no such thing as mass communication. There's only individual communication. If I'm not talking directly to you, I'm not talking to anybody. And if I'm talking to you, I'm talking to everybody. So I'd write them that way. I always left a kind of a back door for my opponent to gracefully leave. I wouldn't say you're totally stupid. I would say it's just not the right thing to do for these reasons. And they could always argue back, and they did. I had a policy that I would run every letter to the editor that ever came into the paper. Every letter. That prevailed until, well, we'll talk about that. It was also a very religious community, very religious. There were a lot of churches here. And there was one interesting story I forgot about. In the 50s, at the land that is now Rancho dos Vientos, that big thing up there, there was a minister from Los Angeles, from the World Church, and he was going to build a real estate development out there for his church parishioners called the World Church City. And he announced in a press conference that a glory cloud would hover over this area in perpetuity. It was sacred land because he could bring fire and water out of the land. And he invited all the media to come out to this barren spot in Newbury Park. He had a pick in one hand, and he hit that ground with that pick, bam! And water came out, gushed. And he hit it again, and he struck a match, and fire came out. It was a gas line and a water line. God, I mean, what a flim-flam. But that's what they were doing at the time. It was flim-flam city. Naturally, the thing failed, and he went back to L.A. and disappeared. For that matter, there was a lot of that. Jungle Land was a flim-flam for a long time.
Tell me about Jungle Land.
Oh God, Jungle Land it was supposed to be a tourist attraction. My God, it was a dirty place. It was filthy. If the SPCA had ever come around there, they would have locked it up. It was a place where they kept animals in very small pens, in very small areas. It had started as a training area for the Hollywood movie industry. They used animals in all kinds of movies then, tigers for Tarzan movies and stuff like that. And Louis Goebel imported these animals from Africa, and he had trainers on hand, among them Mabel Stark, who was a female lion tamer, and she got some publicity, and Jane, what was her name? The movie actress. God, I can't think of her name.
Russell.
No. Jane Mansfield. Jane Mansfield. She was out there with her son one day and the son got caught. These are old stories that don't really matter, but that's the kind of area it was. The religious aspect of it came into play later, because in addition to that crazy world church, there later became the Church Universal and Triumphant. That was in the late 70s, I think. And they were really in Calabasas, but their influence was in Thousand Oaks. It was a cult of people who were convinced that the end of the world was at hand. This woman, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, came out of Glendale, bought the old Gillette Mansion down in Calabasas, created a campus, a university campus, and then a school campus for kids all the way from this to this. These people were given tapes to play and to recite, and they would chant repeatedly, and they became mind controlled. It came to our attention when a woman called and said she wanted to get her son out of there and she couldn't get to see him. She wasn't allowed to talk to him.
And what year was this?
I think in the 70s, late 70s. Must have been late 70s. A reporter went down there, they wouldn't let him into the place. And that's when we really started thinking something might be going on. So the reporter finally did get in. And it was a wild thing. This woman, she had a religion of colors. Purple was a powerful color. Red was a color of drama. White was a color of purity. Blue was a color of sex. It was nuts. But she did it and got away with it. People signed over all their money to her, all their beholdings, everything. It must have been the late 70s because they had a gas station and they were selling gasoline when nobody else had gasoline. Remember the big gas shortage?
Yes.
Yeah. They had gasoline. They were selling gasoline. Just strange setup.
Interesting.
They finally moved out. They were able to sell the holdings to the state of California for a headquarters for the Santa Monica Mountains Park, and they moved to Montana where they did a survivor situation up there. I think they're still there. I think Elizabeth Clare Prophet now has Alzheimer's, so she's over there. These are just pictures of things. Anyway, come here in '64, and I get here, and I write editorials. And people get mad, but they write letters, and they understand. Looking back on Thousand Oaks then and now, I think there are probably two people who are responsible more than anybody else for what is here now. And I don't think they're given the credit for it. One was Glenn, what was his last name? The second city manager. Glenn Kendall. Glenn Kendall was the second city manager they hired. The first one was he was a financial man, but didn't have any idea of what it took to run a city. Glenn Kendall put in all of the infrastructure in the city. There were 3 water companies and a water district. There was one sewer company owned by Jantz. There was one park, Erbs Park, which is this little tiny quarter of an acre with a tennis court. There was no plan, nothing. Everybody was running around thinking they were still living in LA County. And they had a city that nobody knew where it was. City Hall was at 1429 Thousand Oaks Boulevard, a second floor of an office building. They elected a good city council. On the planning commission was a guy named Art Kudla, who was a gas station operator who was a member of the John Birch Society, which had its headquarters out in Newbury Park, by the way. John Birch Society was you know about it?
I remember the John
very
Birch
conservative,
Society,
very
yes.
ultra right wing. Mm-hmm. That was centered here. It was a free and easy place. Glenn Kendall brought with him all the engineering requirements. He was not an engineer, but he knew what engineering was. It was under his tenure that the engineering was worked out for Westlake Village, so that all the land would drain into one area, because there was terrible drainage in the area at the time, terrible. Floods on Thousand Oaks Boulevard all the time. Erbs Road was always flooded out. You couldn't get through. But Westlake Village never had a flooding problem. Under his tenure, all that engineering was done to create what is Westlake Lake. It's got to go someplace and make a lake, and they did. It was under his tenure that the sewer system was bought from Jantz. Jantz owned it. The city bought it. And it was under his tenure that the city council passed a law that you couldn't annex to the city of Thousand Oaks unless you bought into the sewer system. And you couldn't get into the sewer system unless you annexed to the city of Thousand Oaks, which explains how Thousand Oaks has all this land and got control of their neighborhoods. Glenn Kendall was a very tough guy to deal with. I mean, he was not a patsy. And he didn't give very much attention to social welfare issues or community benefits or artistic things. He had to build a city, and he did. His successor, Grant Brimhall, is the one who put the heart into that city. Those two men, more than anybody else, I think are responsible for what is here now. And I don't think either one of them gets the credit that they deserve for it. I worked closely with both of them, not always in unanimous harmony. There were times when they wanted to do stuff that I didn't think was right, and I told people I didn't think it was right, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. The newspaper was a very active participant in the town, extremely active, proactive in some cases, reactive in others. We plumped for bond issues, we attacked bond issues, we plumped for school reform, we applauded school reform, we endorsed candidates and we said why, and we opposed candidates and we said why. And I got away with it for 26 years, never went to jail.
Do you see that now?
Never, nowhere.
In the journalism?
Nowhere. Well, again, I lived in the best journalistic time there ever could be for me. The owner of the newspaper and 6 other newspapers was a man who had his own fortune. He didn't have to worry about stockholders. He had no accountability to Wall Street, didn't borrow any money from banks. He was able to finance what he wanted to do out of his own holdings. And his name was John P. Scripps. And wisely, I think, he had 2 people in each newspaper. One was the editor and one was the business manager. The business manager took care of the business and the editor took care of the editorial side. And they were co-equal. It was a really strange setup. No other newspaper I know of ever had it. Only the Scripps newspapers did.
And News Chronicle is a Scripps newspaper.
At that time it was the John P. Scripps newspaper. Not Scripps Howard. John P. Scripps. And I was entrusted with it. Go and do it. Go and do it. And I did it. And we did it. And it's so anachronistic now. I mean, today, when I read that Knight Ridder is laying off people at San Jose, at the San Jose Mercury News, San Jose Mercury, because they have to meet a certain profit goal or the Wall Street boys will not like what they did. I mean, this is an order from Tony Ridder, who is a journalist by training, not a businessman by training. You can feel the gun at his head. And it's not just there, it's everywhere. It's here too. It's all done by formula. It's all done with a wheel that tells you how much of this and how much of that and how many young readers you have and how many old readers. We didn't know how many young readers we had. We just had a lot of readers. When I came here, the newspaper had 900 subscribers. When I left, it had 26,000.
When did you leave the News Chronicle?
In January 1991. I was ready.
What is your biggest personal achievement?
Oh, wow. Personal achievement? My family. My son was an architect. He designed our house, lovely house.
And where do you live?
In Morro Bay. He left the field because he couldn't deal with some of the people who were in it. But he now he's doing work and has a good life. My older daughter she's a webmaster up at San Francisco State University, self-taught. She got her master's degree in film studies, but the web just fascinated her, so she got to know more about that than about movies. My youngest daughter lives in Simi Valley, We have 2 grandchildren, one just born last September. And my wife is very busy doing good work as the director of an agency that recruits volunteer old people to counsel people, old people who are in need of somebody to listen to them. She does that. And I'm busy. I wrote a play, and it's going to be produced in February, and I have an art show, a photo show now going on in Morro Bay. So it's a very nice life.
So you're enjoying your retirement.
Every bit of it.
That's great.
Every bit of it.
Do you have
That's my personal achievement. Professional achievements are others.
Do you have a personal motto?
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
2 of them. One is humility. The other is love it for what it is. Love it for what it is. Don't look for what isn't there. Because what's there is pretty good. And if you love it, if you embrace it, if you really clutch it to your body and say, I really love this thing, that's all you really have to do. I love Thousand Oaks for what I see now. I didn't for a while. I love the newspaper for what it is now. It is. It's okay. It's all right. It's good. It's got a lot of stuff in it. It's not what isn't there anymore. And it's not what it isn't there now. But if you just go around looking for ghosts and for things that aren't there and for things that you want to be there, you'll be a very unhappy person.
It's good advice. Is there something I missed, some question that you'd like to?
Yeah, my greatest professional achievement.
Yes, what is your greatest professional
It's not
achievement?
the newspaper, which isn't there anymore. And I'll tell you, that's really a disappointment. And you talk about love it for what it is. Where is that newspaper?
It was a good newspaper.
Yeah, it did a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff. I could say that the greatest professional achievement was the memories that people have of that newspaper, but that's not it, because the newspaper really isn't anything. It's gone. But the people who were on that newspaper, the staff that I had, they're all over the place. They're all over the LA Times. They're all over the San Diego paper. They're in Sacramento. They're Shirley Ann Cobb was there. All these people were there. And the environment that we had was something that I think I almost had it was like playing an organ. You know, you play this stop and that stop and this key and that key. And things happen in that environment, far beyond the ability of any of us. The sum was far greater than any of its parts. And it just happened. It was the perfect time.
Well, I usually don't come out of my mode as host here, but having had worked for you, I know it's because you treated all of your employees like journalists.
Well, they were journalists. Why not?
But
of course
you called
they were.
them journalists.
Of course they were. And the thing is, that if you open the door and you say, "Come on in," and then you say, "Well, you can only sit in that chair," that's not "come on in." That's not "come on." That's "come on in and sit in that chair." Mm-hmm. I really gave them as much lead as they could possibly expect, and they loved it. They loved it. And I see the photographers' names on Anacleto Rapping, who's a big-time photographer at the LA Times. Major stuff. Shoots all the covers for Calendar. I started him. I got him out of school. And that's the real professional achievement.
That's great.
I wish newspapers were a little better, but that's that.
I've enjoyed having you.
Been fun being here.
Personally and professionally. Thank you, Mr. Sosna.
Thank you, love.
Okay, now we just kind of chit-chat and you're in the credit.